In November 1972, an American delegation of scientists visited Moscow. The Russians told them that they had found the human cancer virus in 5 different cell lines. It was the breakthrough.
Well, they were claiming they had discovered the human cancer virus, that this was a human tumor virus growing in human cancer cells isolated from different organs. And there were like 5 different laboratories in Moscow that had the similar claim. As simple as that.
It's possible that the Russians had this, and they thought it's possible that they had it. Politically, it would have been a tremendous thing for them. It would have been a true finding. It would have truly established them in the eyes of all the world. That indeed they were the first to isolate a human tumor virus, which we were looking for, which we were working toward all of these years of the virus cancer program.
It was a proud moment for the Russians. They sent samples of the 5 cell lines to the Americans. All their visitors could offer in return was a box containing viruses that caused cancer in animals.
National Institute of Health, USA. А в ней вирусы животных, вирусы опухолей животных, те, на которых производились все исследования в то время. Это мышиные вирусы вот в этой коробке. Здесь вирусы кур, куриные вирусы.
Как отзывались на этот подарок?
Очень хорошо. Ну, прекрасно. Но это от сердца.
The Americans immediately flew the Russian cells back to Washington. They were taken in great secrecy to the headquarters of the War on Cancer.
Our purpose was to test their viruses and their cells for the known viruses. There was evidence that the Russians had been correct, that there was a viral reverse transcriptase in the supernatants from these cells.
So they had viruses?
They did have virus. But it was our job to confirm everything we had been told. So the cells were also examined to demonstrate that they were of human origin. This is when we sent them to Walter and Nelson Rees.
These cells were treated with kid gloves. This was a precious arrival of something extraordinary, because something was showing up in these cells that was new, novel, exciting. And these cells were going to be handled very carefully, and only until they had been examined thoroughly was anything going to be said about them, done with them, sent to other people, or anything, God forbid, anything published on these particular cells, because this was a breakthrough. And sooner than not, the results came back, and all of these cell lines had type AG6PD, which meant to us that they were derived from black individuals, probably from 20% of a black population. Now, I knew about Lumumba University. I knew that there was a large contingent of African blacks in Moscow. But you know, I just thought there's something fishy here. It just can't be.
So Nelson Rees examined the chromosomes of the Russian cells. He found they were all identical to HeLa. It meant only one thing. Somehow, some of Henrietta Lacks' cells had got through the Iron Curtain. And the virus the Russians found turned out to be no more than a harmless monkey virus. She had picked it up on her journey to Moscow. Then the Russians arrived in Washington for their return visit. How did you go about telling them the bad news?
It was difficult. As I recall, we had one of the joint meetings of the 2 delegations in Bethesda. The Russian scientists on one side of the table, and the Americans on the other side, and all this sort of thing. We even brought in the scientists, Walter and Nelson Rees, who had worked on this one cell line that they thought was a human tumor cell line producing product.
It inadvertently became a national and international event, because I was clearly blurting out the fact that this was one and the same cell line, albeit perhaps different cultures, of cells from Henrietta Lacks with the same identical virus growing on them, and had nothing to do with some new discovery. And this is a slap in the face.
Нельсон Рис Он показал по хромосомам, по характерным хромосомам и по характерному маркерному ферменту он смог идентифицировать линии, которые на самом деле являются хиля, так сказать, не соответствует своему названию, на самом деле является хиля. Ну, в общем, это уже сразу стало ясно, что и в Америке линии загрязнены, во всем мире, и к нам они же пришли, они не у нас были выведены, эти линии, они же тоже к нам пришли из Америки, из Европы.
Наверное, отреагировали. Наверное, отреагировали. Ну, может, старались не очень показывать это дело. Так. Не очень показывать.
At a press conference, the Russians tried to put a brave face on events.
Позвольте прежде всего поблагодарить
Permit me, first of all, to
правительство Соединенных Штатов
thank the government
за
of the United States
приглашение
of
нашей
America.
делегации.
Our delegation considers this trip to be very beneficial and very useful.
Sure. May I please intervene? I don't think it's fair to the minister to ask him to comment on specific individuals.
But the news had leaked out, although the Americans attempted to hush it up.
Which was convened in order to give...
Although we attempted to play it down considerably, the Russian episode was visible and newsworthy enough that it contributed to the increasing skepticism about the way the virus cancer program would find the human tumor virus. Another example of a failure for a claim to be upheld. And as a result, then, people begin to believe there is no claim that will be upheld.
By the mid-70s, those in charge of the war on cancer realized they were as far away as ever from understanding why cells became cancerous. Billions of dollars had been spent, but they had found no virus.
And so political pressure and all of this sort of thing started building up. And sooner or later, they came to realize that, well, the virus cancer program isn't that great. You have not come across a human tumor virus yet, and you've been in business since 1964. The program died. I'm not saying it died a miserable death, it just disappeared.
What had begun as a vast project to push back the boundaries of death had failed. The secret of what made human cells turn into cancer and grow and divide ceaselessly remained elusive. But the scientists and politicians had raised enormous expectations. They had turned cancer into a public enemy and promised to conquer it. And those expectations remained.
The 2 million American men and women who are leading the fight against cancer. I am not resigned to the shutting away of loving hearts in the hard ground. So it is and so it will be. The best is lost. The honest look, the laughter, the love, they're gone. They're gone to feed the roses. I know, but I do not approve. And I am not resigned.
But at this very moment of scientific despair, a new theory of how to conquer cancer emerged. And yet again, behind its rise to power, was Henrietta Lacks and her cells. It came from a new generation of scientists who believed that cancer was not caused by a virus from outside. It came from inside, from the genes.
The genetic theory of the cause of cancer said that the enemy is within, it's in your genes. So from the very moment you're born, the bomb is ticking away inside of you. It's much more difficult, it's more insidious. We have to intervene within your own body, we have to be more intrusive, we can't keep it away. You have to probe and uncover the bad DNA.
But up to this time, there had been no way of identifying particular genes. Then an English geneticist called Professor Harris found a way.
Professor Harris fused HeLa cells with a mouse cell. The resulting cells, the clones of cells that are then isolated, have different elements of the HeLa cell genetics. It allowed people to try to map genes to different chromosomes, and this was a fundamental tool in the development of gene mapping.
Henrietta Lacks now became an object of fascination for geneticists. They wanted to know everything about her, not just her cells, but her entire genetic history. The problem was, she was dead.
You couldn't study her genetics because she had died. So the only way to figure out what she was genetically, in terms of all these different markers, was to go back to her family.
In 1976, a team of geneticists set out to track down the remaining members of the Lacks family. They found her husband and 4 of her children still living in Baltimore.
I say it was about 15 or 20 years after she'd been dead, and they wanted to do this genetic research to find out whether any of the kids carried her, the same gene that she carried or whatever. So they wanted blood, so they came, and they asked permission to draw blood from her children.
A doctor and a nurse came to the house and had all of us there. The blood test they did on us, they took blood tests from each one of the kids, each one of my mother's kids, and they told us that they just tested it to see if what my mother had was hereditary.
I said, "You're working on her cells?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Her cells are still alive." And I just, you know how I was just truly amazed. And he said he'd been working on it for years.
And it like took us by surprise. We never knew this. And there's another thing that got me upset with him, like, is there anything else I don't know? And it can get scary when you think about it. I mean, how much of ourselves is out there, you know?
The new technology of gene mapping gave geneticists a feeling of power and confidence. They became convinced that they would find the cause of cancer. They would open up the cell and isolate the cancer genes. And yet again, Hollywood became involved. The stars turned out to fund the scientists who offered a new promise. They would find the cancer genes and then repair or replace them. And cancer would be cured.
What you're here to support tonight is something that is somewhat of a new approach to try and identify and understand the basic mechanisms that change a normal cell into a malignant cell. And then once we understand these mechanisms, to try and direct our therapy specifically at those alterations.
Well, their view of the world is that if I knew the sequence of a gene, I would know what it does. And if I know what it does, then I'll be able to replace its faulty operation by giving it something else. And so people give them lots of money, they give them their faith, they believe in them, they hope in them, because they're going to save me by screwing around with your genes.
And if cancer could be cured, one could make a great deal of money. The new biotechnology firms, which grew up in the 80s, seized on the promises being made by the scientists.
The scientists said to the capitalists, we now have a technology that's going to enable us to cure cancer. And it was more than hope. It was a belief. And it fostered the biotechnology industry. I mean, if it was possible to conquer cancer, you're probably talking about the largest market in the world. And remember, all human beings are equal. There's almost no other products outside of bullets that work on all people equally. And so suddenly there was an opportunity to make a lot of money.
They're profiting off of her while her family remains ignorant of all the things about her.
Because they've taken the cells and used it without permission. They have also distributed without permission.
Does she belong to the family?
And they also have research, you know. And one reason, because this is a family matter.
Thank you. Sell it.